Good evening and welcome to Reboot Represents. I'm your host, Harry Turpin. With me, as always, behind the scenes is producer and fellow board member Kevin Tanner. Before we start, I'd like to take this moment to state unequivocally Black Lives Matter. For more information about the movement and how you can get involved through following, learning, and donating, please visit blacklivesmatter.com/about. We would also like to take a moment to acknowledge that wherever you're joining us from, you are on Indigenous land. Reboot Represents broadcasts and operates on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and all Coast Salish people. We acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities from this land while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here. To this day, the Duwamish have yet to receive federal recognition. We encourage you to visit the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center in West Seattle to learn more. You can start by visiting their website at duwamishtribe.org/longhouse. You may have noticed that Reboot Represents looks a little different tonight. That's because I'm broadcasting from my secret squirrel bunker, most likely because squirrels ate through the wires of my internet. But we're scrappy here at Reboot, and I'm excited to present the show from this new location. And Kevin is standing by in case the squirrels have decided to track me down to fulfill a personal vendetta. But as we show people say, the show must go on. Speaking of shows, we have what I'm sure is going to be a fantastic and enlightening show for you tonight. This past March was Disability Awareness Month, and April 2nd was World Autism Awareness Day. This year's theme celebrated the resilience of those affected by the disorder. We here at Reboot believe theater should be accessible for everyone. As a theater organization, Reboot is always looking for ways to make our programming available to everybody, whether on stage or off. Tonight, I'm delighted and thrilled as I'm joined by our three guest panelists as we talk about the challenges, the work being done, and the possibilities to realize that dream. My first guest tonight is Mickey Rowe. Mickey Rowe, him, has had a prolific and varied career as an actor, director, and public speaker. Now highly sought after both nationally and internationally, he was the epicenter of significant publicity when he became the first autistic actor to play Christopher Bone, the lead role in the Tony Award-winning play The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This also made him the first autistic actor to ever play any autistic character in a professional performance setting. He has appeared as the title role in the Tony Award-winning play Amadeus and more. Mickey was the founding artistic director of National Disability Theater, which works in partnership with Tony Award-winning companies such as La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego and the Goodman Theater in Chicago and more. NDT Productions reimagined disability and universal design as key storytelling and design elements, showcasing that people can be successful not just in spite of their challenges, but also because of them. National Disability Theater's productions feature only professional artists, artisans, and designers with disabilities. Please welcome to the show, Mickey. Hi, Mickey.
Hello, it is such an honor to be here today with you.
Thank you for being here. I'm so glad that you could join us this evening. Joining us on the panel is Annie Jankovic. Annie Jankovic began her sound theater journey 2 years ago as a house manager. In the last year, Annie played a key role in accessibility and programming, including managing their Crossroads in Theater series, implementing access policies, and organizing live captioning and ASL interpretation for rehearsals, workshops, and performances. Please welcome to the show, Annie. Hi, Annie.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And joining our panel and rounding it out, we have Seranine, she, her, a disabled, autistic, ADHD, intersex trans woman of color, an artist who experiences her body as a sensitive instrument with many forms of creative expression. Her latest album, Final Flight of the Solanas, completes the Automatron trilogy, a tripart album released intentionally in pieces between 2019 and 2020. She is currently writing her fourth studio album and assembling a band to play it, while simultaneously working with Village Theater's inaugural BIPOC Northwest Creator Residency Program to begin development on a new musical. It is also Seranine's birthday, so please welcome to the show, Seranine. Hello, Seranine.
Hi, thank you so much. It is my birthday.
Thanks for being here and for giving up your birthday evening to be a part of this program.
I'm actually really happy to be here, and the gift of being heard after being taught to really hide myself for so much of my life, and really I don't remember it because of that. This is a really wonderful gift for me to have on the evening of this birthday. So thank you so much for inviting
thank you
me.
for being here, and thank you to everybody for being here. Now, we were talking off camera before the show started about trying this thing. So we're going to try this thing, and it is going to be a disaster. I already know it's going to be a disaster for everybody.
I'm so excited.
But we were talking about it, and we're bringing Kevin in too, so that way Kevin can participate. But essentially, we were like, should we sing to Seranine? And Seranine's like, yes, please do this. Please do this. And we're like, let's let's just fly blind and do it live. It's going to be a disaster. I already know, and I'm really excited about it because we'll see whose mic cuts in on what. But we're going to sing Happy Birthday to Seranine live on the show here tonight as a complete disaster. And here we go. Kevin, why don't you kick it off for us?
And a 1, and a 2, and a 3, and a go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Seranine. Happy birthday to you.
Hey, we got a little harmony in there. There was a little harmony in there too.
That went way better than I thought.
Yeah,
And also, I felt a little bit like I was in like the original Star Trek, and for some reason my character was having a breakdown where everybody was like weirdly singing happy birthday to her. Yeah.
We only lost 5 viewers from that rendition of Happy Birthday. So, hey, we'll call that a win.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to everybody for being here. I do want to acknowledge again, I am broadcasting. Thank you, Kevin. It was so good to see you. And Kevin will be here and popping things in and out of the show as we go on. Again, I want to acknowledge I am not broadcasting from my normal space, and Annie is having a little bit of internet lag going on there. So we'll be generous and gracious as that happens, but everything should be great. We're going to kick this off, and for all of our guests, I would love for you each to tell me a little bit how you got started in theater. What was the spark, the beginning of it all? And we will start with you, Annie.
Yeah, I think mine is pretty typical. I did theater in middle school because my brother's high school needed a young girl, and I was a young girl. Continued it into high school, kind of just fell in love and didn't stop.
That's great. So you were the young girl of the town? Like you were the one that they went to? Or how did that work?
Yep. For their production of Fiddler on the Roof, they needed a young daughter. And despite being taller than some of the high schoolers, they were like, she's young. It works.
Who did you play? Were you Spritza or Bilka?
Yeah, I was Sprinza.
Yeah. That's awesome. And what about for you, Seranine? How did you get your start in theater?
I don't want to be too dark, but trauma is really the beginning. I'm glad I got these questions in advance to think about this. The first piece is trauma, because I have to actually act for most of my life, and I don't know that I'm doing that. And I don't understand what the stakes are either. But the next thing is more probably ordinary. It's just community college. Or maybe that's even darker. I don't know. Community college, I did some theater classes, like some improv and, improv and sketch comedy and acting styles and things like that. But most recently, really was just laziness. Just like embracing me and my body and her nature. We're sort of like, I have a lot of depersonalization. We're sort of separated. That's why I started using they pronouns on Sundays. And it's this sense of just letting my body actually be what she is and do what she does. And I have time and space to do that now that I haven't had for most of my life. And in the course of that, I just, when I have the energy, will reach out about a project that I see, in some of these like Facebook theater groups or something like that. And I haven't done many of them, but when I do them, people are really happy with the work, including me. So that's what I've been doing.
That's awesome. How about for you, Mickey? How did you get your start in theater?
Yeah, so like Seranine, I feel like, and like so many autistic people, I have really had to act my whole life to try to pass as neurotypical, or to try to pass as being non-autistic. And I also think for a lot of autistic people, life is so much easier when we have a specific role to play, right? So like this right here is so easy because you are the interviewer and I'm the interviewee, right? The roles are really clear. You ask the questions and I'm supposed to sound smart and funny. But like in real life, if we saw each other on the street, those roles aren't as clear, right? If we are just peers on the street, there's no kind of guide telling me who you're supposed to be or who I'm supposed to be, or how that interaction is supposed to look. So for my whole life, I was always looking for ways where I could interact with the world through a more clear role. So I was always wearing clown costumes or stilt walking or walking around with a top hat on as a magician. And at one point, Seattle Opera needed a stilt walker and knew that I was a stilt walker. And that's how I got my start in theater, sort of.
You mentioned the roles not necessarily being terribly clear when not in a set setting, like something like this, where there's an interview. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, as you were starting out your career and figuring those things, if there was a challenge, and maybe there were multiple challenges. I'm not necessarily asking you to pick the one grand challenge, but if there's a challenge that maybe comes to the forefront of your mind about the work that you wanted to do, something that came up that was a roadblock that you had to face or overcome that made you take pause. And I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit further, Mickey.
Totally. Yeah. So in terms of the first part, I think that just because for many people on the autism spectrum, kind of understanding the social rules is not clear, right? Anytime we can give ourselves more specific roles, that helps to kind of define some of those social rules that we might not be able to pick up on ourselves, or give us different social rules at least. And then the other part of your question, gosh, I don't know that necessarily my autism itself has been the biggest challenge in my life, as much as the way society sees my autism. If that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I want to clarify that too. Not to present your autism as the challenge itself, but other people's perception of your autism.
Yeah. So I think that the biggest challenge there, because in our society, right, people perceive social intelligence as being intelligence itself, as like kind of one of the be all and end alls of intelligence. And because things like eye contact and a firm handshake are so important to how our world works and how jobs work, like right now, 85% of college graduates on the autism spectrum are unemployed. I'm going to repeat that again. And this is this study was done pre-pandemic, but 85% of college graduates on the autism spectrum are unemployed. And I think that's not because we are less capable or less intelligent, but mostly just because of stereotypes and preconceived notions that other people have before ever even really working with us. So that's been a huge challenge throughout my life, for sure, employment in that way.
Yeah, I would imagine that. That would be very, very difficult. Why don't we move to you, Seranine, and why don't you talk a little bit maybe about, you had mentioned some of the trauma and things that were popping up, and how you've had to essentially perform all of your life. And I'm wondering if there's maybe a roadblock or a couple things that you can point to throughout your journey that kind of has something that just kind of comes to the forefront of your mind.
Capitalism.
All right.
Capitalism. Yeah, well,
Speak to that.
Well, I mean, the thing that I'm made into, the reason my body is kind of taken over and taken away from me, is to just be made use of as some kind of like economic foot soldier, some kind of laborer. And because I'm taught to like present myself and think of myself and everything, dream of myself literally as a cishet white man, I just I carry myself that way, and I don't understand how the world is like parting itself for me at that time. But also, it's not really for me; it's for this idea of me that I'm inhabiting, and I'm just going to write code or whatever for, I'm like writing calendar widgets for internal websites that don't exist, for companies that also don't exist, like, et cetera, right? So most of my life is consumed with that. I don't get to actually pursue my art much. I do have the time and space to like understand myself as an artist to some degree. The entire second album, Exile and Guy, is made up of songs that I write while I think I am a guy, including the first song is written when I'm 19 or 20. So it's not that I didn't have these songs in me or these stories to tell. It's just that I don't have a way to even take time to make sense of them. Never mind get into a studio and record them until I'm here. And here is a housing for disabled veterans that I just happened to have fallen into because I don't have a way to pay for anything else. And this is, well, it's just this side of free, right? So now that I have like guaranteed housing, and I have health care-ish, and because of the visibility that I've managed to achieve, I've got like enough. I'm like successfully begging enough on the internet each month or each week or whatever as the need arises, that I'm managing to not die while I try to get disability support. But even while all of that like big machinery stuff is kind of churning around me, I now have all of this time and space to just be here. And I've started to really understand how my body works as this sensitive instrument. And mostly what I have to do, this kind of brain part, is not the stuff that people taught me all my life, which is like go and like really like rigorously study music theory and learn how to assemble and manufacture songs or anything like that. It is instead to just take care of this simple animal body and invite her to do whatever she feels like doing. And that play can look like sitting around and video gaming for whatever, if she's really into something like that, or to just play the guitar, play some song, or like we have some sort of like movement in us. Now we have time and space to explore that. And we don't have that for most of our lives. And I think so many people have even a greater degree of this, where they don't even have the time and space to write some songs or feel that they have music in them, or like to make some marks on paper and start drawing and getting better at that, because their bodies are similarly taken over and given this entire role to play. And that keeps them from discovering like their whole self, their real self, and just how to be in their body and take care of that simple animal.
So for you, it's not one roadblock. It has been a continuous journey through recognizing who she might be and letting her be able to have a voice, to be able to express herself while within the constraints of this capitalist society that is telling you that you can be this you have to be this particular way, and you're not allowed to exist this other way.
Yeah, and even now there's a lot of like trans women kind of, as far as I can tell, are allowed like one job, and it's trans woman. And then even within that like scope, there can only be like one or two of each like kind. So like if you're not the Seranine who's managed to achieve whatever I've carved out for myself here, and I have whatever amount of literally just direct cash that people give me so that I don't die, like actually so I can eat and buy my medication and things like that, right? That's my actual life. I'm getting that just because I look the way I look or something, right? Combination of a number of things, but like it starts with things like that. I look the way white supremacy tells you someone you should help and care about should look. And no matter what anybody else out here watching this thinks about this, we have a lifetime of being in a culture that constantly assails us with that message. So either you've been constantly fighting it, and then you see someone like me and think, well, maybe she needs help, maybe she doesn't, or whatever, right? Or you've just been bowled over because you've got to go to work, you've got to do this, you've got to keep doing these things so that you also don't die. And you see me saying, hey, I don't have any money right now, and somewhere in you there's this culture saying, well, look, thin people, white people, people who look this way, right? Look, she's pretty feminine, no hair on this chest, right? This kind of stuff. I get to be that trans woman, and it's kind of a job. That kind of barrier. This thing, I made some notes here. This thing about like all of these stories, this whole world I'm talking about of stories that are for cishet white men, means the stories are centered on them and only minorly inclusive of anyone who's like 1 degree away. So you have like their woman and their children, right? There's like sort of the object people who are closest to them. Everybody else is just like an idea of being on out from there. So the best I can hope for as me to like play someone who's like me and see myself in any kind of mainstream media product is going to be, well, maybe they'll cast me as a barista, right? I'm the mystical barista who like gives like 2 lines of advice to somebody and that's it, right? Trans women. Trans women can be baristas. I should have put that into. And some of us code, I hear. But it's the world of these roles, like Mickey's talking about earlier, these roles, but so rigidly constructed that it's always, somebody walked into a room looking a certain way and we all kind of assume this is the person we're going to listen to now, or not, right? We hear about stories like this all the time for someone who's not the cishet white guy walking into a space and having people sort of be rude or dismissive of them because they don't understand that they're the person who's here speaking or something like that, right? Because we don't expect this up here, right? Talking this kind of stuff. That's the roadblock. The number one thing really though, like, I mean, yes, it's capitalism overall, but the number one thing for me personally is that effect of I'm so consumed with just trying to not die in this system, just trying to have enough resources to just not die, that I don't have the time or energy to find the rest or do the rest, right? I can't produce anything that people would say, oh, this is great, I want to listen to this or anything.
Thank you for that very, very honest answer. I really appreciate you sharing your truth and speaking to that. We're going to move to you, Annie. Something as you were starting your career and possibly a roadblock or a challenge that got in the way of something that you wanted to do or made you take pause and say, hey, this is something that I'm going to have to work a little bit harder to be able to accomplish. Is there anything that pops to mind for you?
Yeah, it's it's actually funny. The thing that comes to mind is high school basketball. And like that's not theater, but it definitely set the stage for how I was going to be treated in college and professionally. Because I'm a type 1 diabetic and people don't like that. And type 1 diabetes is a very all-consuming chronic illness, and it's very fluid, like minute to minute it changes. And it really does consume your entire body, your entire life. And people in the theater industry love this like endless grind mentality, and that if you're not ready to be at like 100% at any given moment, then you're not trying hard enough. And I've been chastised in a number of rehearsals for having to sit down for a little bit because of a bad blood sugar. I was even told at a rehearsal that I'd been at for 2 hours that when my blood sugar went high and I said, I need to go deal with this, and the director had gotten mad at me and had said, like, you need to deal with that before rehearsal. And I was like, that's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked. And, you know, no matter the number of times I try to explain it, many people don't want to hear it. They don't want you to have to take more than 5 minutes. If you take more than a 5-minute break, you're really pushing it, especially with something like diabetes, where recovering from a low blood sugar, for example, is like I eat a fruit snack and then I sit there. And like people are always like, do you need more? I'm like, no, I just need to sit here until it's better. And people get really mad when it's not immediately better. So I've encountered quite an awful lot of resistance for trying to take care of my blood sugar and make sure it's okay. And I spent a lot of my youth ignoring it and not doing that. And like my high school basketball, my coach is furious anytime I would have to take more than like 30 seconds to deal with it. So I just didn't. And that's bad for your health. Yes. to do that. And so like nowadays, the last few years, I really fight back on that. And it does not make people happy. They are used to, I feel like there's two kinds of disabled people that abled people are used to seeing in theater. And it's the one who tells you right at the very beginning, I have a disability, and then it never comes up again, and you don't have to deal with it, you don't have to look at it, you don't have to acknowledge its existence. Or the person who you see as very difficult, and they're always bringing stuff up, and nothing's ever good enough for them, and like, I'm definitely that second person. And like most of the people I encounter, it's really, they expect you to be one or the other, especially with a, invisible illness. They're like, well, I can't see it, so I'm going to pretend it's not there. And I've had many directors say things like this, where they forget that it's there or that they had to account for it. And I'm like, that's funny because I never forget. I never get to forget that it's there. And that's caused a lot of problems, especially because I don't take stuff lying down anymore. I did enough of that and it wasn't good for my health. And so there's a lot of roadblocks like that. Another specific one that comes to mind, because I'm also a part-time cane user for chronic fatigue, chronic fainting, and like chronic pain. And I have encountered before a director hiring me, and I said, like, I have these problems because it was a musical. And he said, you're just going to be a singer mostly. Like, you don't have to worry about it. I said, great. And then we get like weeks into rehearsal, and then they inform us that our chorus is actually going to be moving all the sets. And they got real mad when I was like, okay, but I can't. So you want me to lift like a heavy chest, and like I just can't do that. And they got very mad because, again, they don't see it, so they don't think it's there. And then all of a sudden you have to wrap your brain around how we're going to fix this because you assumed that my body worked a certain way by looking at me. And that's most of how it goes.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing your story and for being so honest, and for all of you doing that. It's really disheartening sitting here as somebody who directs in this community to think that there are people out there who are doing that. It breaks my heart to even just imagine. I could never imagine my rehearsal room ever being something like that. And so to hear that you had to go through something like that is just absolutely disheartening and makes me sick. But I want to talk about some of the things that we can do to move forward. And for those of you who are joining us here for Reboot Represents, we're speaking with a few of our guests are identify as disabled people. They are disabled people, and we are talking about change and how to make that accessible in the community and in the work that we're doing. And in part of that also, we will have a chance for you to be able to ask them questions. That'll come up a little bit later in the hour. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat window and we will grab them and address them as we get to that point. Mickey, I do want to move on and talk a little bit about National Disability Theater. And on their website, they have these statistics that say 20% of American population has a disability. 20% of the American population has a disability, as I mentioned. And this makes people with disabilities both the largest minority group in the United States and also the least represented. Currently, 95% of disabled characters that you see in media, movies, television, etc., are played by non-disabled actors. And the site goes on to say that access not only affects the population's ability to participate in the arts and culture, but that of their spouses and families. And that is a huge percentage of the American population that until now has not felt very comfortable or welcome attending the arts. NDT has a very specific mission towards disrupting the perceived whiteness of disability in the media, and the website speaks about authenticity over accuracy. So I'm wondering if you can expand about the mission of NDT a little bit, as well as the goal of disrupting that perception and what authenticity over accuracy means. I know it's a lot of things coming right at you. And you are on mute, Mickey.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for telling me I'm on mute too. So why don't I start with some of the ways in which NDT is trying to disrupt that, and then talk about authenticity over accuracy. Does that sound okay?
Great? That sounds great.
So firstly, I think one of the ways that we're trying to disrupt that, right, is by just in the way NDT sees itself as a company, and in the way we try to make sure that the audience perceives our actors on stage and the stories we tell, right? We don't want to buy into the narratives of inspiration porn, right? Or as seeing disabled people as people who we should feel sorry for, or as people who are perfect little cherubs, right? Or as people who are simply there to teach other people to be better people, right? That's not that. So we try to instead show that people with disabilities can be badass and be sexy and be powerful and have problems in their lives that don't even have to do with their disability, or that the problems in their lives that do have to do with disability are less about the disability and more about the ableism in our society. Another thing that we try to do to disrupt that is, I feel like often in theater, right, when we talk about accommodations, normally how that appears, at least in the larger houses that are kind of more institutional equity houses, is we see accommodations being slapped on at the end after everything else has been finished, right? So we've already designed the show, we've already rehearsed the show, we've put the show on stage, and then maybe one performance during the run, we will slap on captions, or a couple performances during the run, we will slap on audio descriptions or things like that. And that's kind of how accommodations look in general in theater right now. And what NDT tries to do instead is start from a place of universal design. And what universal design means is that we want to design the same experience for everyone. and we want to work as hard as possible to make it as accessible as possible for everyone, right? It's never going to be 100% accessible, but we're going to do our best to make it as accessible as we can for everyone. Thinking about that from the start of the design process and making sure that that's happening in a way that's universal for everyone. So instead of audio descriptions, for example, being something that certain audience members who want that accommodation opting into, audio descriptions can be built directly into the production so that, for instance, the show that we did it with La Jolla Playhouse, right? Our sound designer had actors record audio descriptions that then he built into the sound cues of the show, layered into the sound effects of the show. So everyone experienced these audio descriptions together, right? Or for instance, every theater has projections. So many theaters use projection design as part of the design of shows. Why can you not build captions into the design of the show using the projections? And instead of just having boring captions on a bar at the top of the screen, make this part one of the storytelling tools, right? Why can't captions be designed artistically? Why can't we have the captions move across the stage from character to character, or swirl, or shake, or explode onto the stage? Why can't this be part of the storytelling elements, right? And that, one, normalizes accommodations for everyone. And two, people who maybe haven't used accommodations in the past are going to better understand what these accommodations are and be like, you know what, this show is better because of that. The accommodations didn't take away from the show, they added to the show, especially as our audiences are aging, right? There are going to be people who maybe have not identified in the past as disabled or have not used accommodations in the past who think, gosh, you know, this show is easier for me to follow because of the captions. And that's the other thing about universal design too, is I feel like so often non-disabled people don't actually care about disabled people. And so I try to remind people, don't do it for disabled people, do it for if you're not going to care about disabled people, fine, whatever, we're used to it, but do it for yourself, because universal design benefits everyone. If you are watching a video in the library or on a bus, right, you are using captions. If you don't have headphones in, you can still watch that video on the bus or in a waiting room because of the captions. If you're a parent like I am and you're pushing a stroller, you are using the curb cuts, right? So people with disabilities need curb cuts to get around. It's not a choice, right? People with mobility disabilities who use curb cuts need them, but they also help everyone. If you're in the airport rolling luggage, you're not going to roll that luggage up the stairs. You're going to take the ramp, right? So the more and more we can think about universal design as exciting and something that benefits everyone and is something that needs to be thought of from the start of the process, I think the better off we'll be as an industry. And then, okay, second part of your question.
Before you dive into that, though, Mickey,
yes.
I do want to go back onto something that you said, which I thought was really
Please.
interesting. You had talked about so going into the storytelling, and part of the work that NDT did, they specifically said that they were hiring folks with disabilities who were there in the beginning. And so I'm wondering if, in terms of diving into and making universal design, not the exception, but the rule, the actual rule, what would you suggest to those organizations that need to do that? Is it really about having somebody, a disabled person at the table there to make sure that they are helping to make those decisions and having those conversations ahead of time? Or really does the onus fall on the non-disabled people to say, hey, if we really want to be inclusive in the work that we're doing in our theater, this is what we have to start thinking forward and doing. And what would you suggest?
Yes, both, absolutely, right? The onus falls on the non-disabled people. And if you don't want to think about it as, I know often when people think about diversity, disability often gets left out of that conversation in diversity. So if you don't want to think about it for people with disabilities because you're not there yet, fine. If you're only thinking about it from a money-making perspective, the non-disabled people need to be thinking about universal design, because again, 20% of the population identifies as disabled, but we don't go to the theater alone. We come to the theater with our families, with our loved ones, with our spouses on dates, right? So multiply that 20%, right? That's a huge percentage of the population who will feel more welcomed at your theater, more likely to subscribe, more likely to donate if you're thinking about universal design. So onus falls on the non-disabled people. But with that said, the autism community had a motto, nothing about us without us, which is now just, I think, grown out of the, and then I have to say the disability, the autism community borrowed that from a disabled movement in Africa that I don't know much about, but I know that it came initially from disabled activists in Africa who came up with the motto, nothing about us without us. Then it went to the autism community in the US, and now it's kind of even blown up further. But nothing about us without us means, yes, if you are designing captions for a show, you need to be having someone who uses captions as an accommodation coming in and working with you. If you are doing a show about autism, right? You need to have autistic people working on that show. If you are doing a show about disability, right? You don't want to fall into that 95% of the, you know, that statistic that 95 from the Ruderman Family Foundation, a study they did where 95% of characters we see on TV and in movies that have disabilities are played by non-disabled actors, right? You need to be hiring from the disabled community.
And which kind of leads us into that second question, which was talking about authenticity over accuracy. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what that basically means is, you know, there are such real world consequences behind the ways we cast shows, right? I think the 85% unemployment rate for autistic college graduates is a great example of that. When we cast autistic actors in autistic roles, it not only affects our industry, but it affects so many industries outside of our own. Because when all the business leaders in Seattle or across the nation come to see a show or turn on their TV and see a TV show or movie and see a disabled actor playing a role and being a badass and killing it, they then realize to themselves, oh, you know what? Look at this person killing it on TV in a very public place. I can hire people with disabilities in my business as well. So that's one way. But then going back to the question you asked, I apologize.
No,
right. If you look at I'm going to speak to autism mostly just because that's my lived experience. If we look at all the movies about autism, right? Rain Man, Atypical, The Good Doctor, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, right? They all portray autism as being a white man, a white cisgendered heterosexual man with savant syndrome. And that's just not real life. That is not real. That's not real life. But because that is who we see in all the movies, in all the books, in all the TV shows, in all the plays about autism, what then happens is when you go to get diagnosed with autism, you don't go straight to an expert. You don't go straight to the specialist. You start with a pediatrician or a general care practitioner or someone like that who maybe learned a little bit about autism but isn't an expert. So where do they get the picture in their head of what autism looks like and whether they're going to refer you to the specialist? They get the picture in their head from the movies they're seeing and the plays they're watching and the TV show and the TV shows they're watching. And if all they're seeing in all of those places is a white man, then if you do not fit that when you come to see the pediatrician, autism is not going to come into their mind. So, and we see this in the real world where women and people of color are so underdiagnosed with autism compared to white men, to the point that previously people thought that men were severely more likely to have autism than women. Now we know that's not the truth. It's just that women are underdiagnosed. And so much of that traces back to our industry, to the entertainment industry and movies like Rain Man, which is where all the general care practitioners who decide whether or not to refer you to the specialist get their pictures of autism from.
So basically, they're comparing you to Dustin Hoffman's portrayal in Rain Man and saying, you don't measure up to that, and we're going to go ahead and send you on. Okay.
Sort of. And so what authenticity over accuracy means is, like, let's say a local theater is doing Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And for whatever reason, they decide, oof, you know, we really tried. We cannot find an autistic person to play Christopher, right? We just can't do it. That's okay. Fine. If you really tried and you can't do it, fine. But we still want to balance the power in the room, right? So if you can't cast Christopher as an autistic person, can you cast his father or his mother or Siobhan, his therapist? Can one of them be an autistic actor? Or can you cast Christopher as someone with a different disability? Or as a woman, can you cast Christopher as a woman or as a person of color? And then that way, even though you weren't able to cast Christopher as an autistic actor, you are still benefiting the autism community by casting a woman or a person of color as Christopher, by showing that autism is not just white man.
Right.
So that's kind of what we mean when we say authenticity over accuracy.
Thank you.
That also opens the door, if I can pop in for a second, for you to actually find the autistic BIPOC woman actor, wherever they are.
Well, and it raises an interesting point, and I was taking some notes as you were talking, Mickey, and I'm going to deviate a little bit from my script here, but it raises an interesting point, and we're going to talk a little bit about what theaters can do in the future, but mostly there's an interesting thing that happens because I've been in this business for a long time, and I've always been trained, this is a job interview, and you go in and you do those sorts of things. There are some legal ramifications about what you can and cannot ask a person in terms of an interview or anything like that. And so my question, and I'm not expecting any of you to have the answer to this because none of us are legal scholars as far as I know, but where does it, like, what is that line in terms of being able to find the right person for that without asking the question that would actually violate that person's civil liberties in any sort of way?
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit, and I'm sure as well Annie and Seranine as well can speak to their experiences with that. Firstly, right, like with National Disability Theater, when we were looking to say we are casting disabled folks, right? Are we allowed to say that, or are we discriminating against non-disabled folks by saying that? And what we found is non-disabled folks are not a protected class, right? People with disabilities are a protected class. People with non-disabled folks, that's not a protected class of people. So when we asked lawyers, we found we could say we are specifically only looking for disabled folks. Further than that, though, to answer your question about, in general, how do you get this information? You want to be inclusive. What I have found is people with disabilities are scared to ask for the accommodations they need. I can speak to that myself. To audition for a play, right, I need the sides provided in large print. If the sides are not in large print, I have no shot in hell at anything, because instead of my audition being about how me and you can connect and how I can change you and you can change me, the audition is about me slowly trying to pick through this 12-point font, taking an hour to dissect a word. And that's not acting. That's not what we're in the room trying to do together, right. Collaborate. But I went through a long period where I had been asking for large print, been asking for large print. No one provided it. And so I stopped asking. So what I have found is when you make your casting announcement, you want to put on there, right, if you have any, if there are any special accommodations that we can provide for you, please let us know. But that's not quite enough to put, because people with disabilities have been so trained to be terrified to let anyone know what they need. So one small thing that I've found that helps a little bit is going the one extra mile by adding some accommodations that we have provided in the past include but are not limited to, and listing the accommodations that you have provided in the past, just so that people with disabilities know, oh wait, they're serious, they know what they're talking about, I can tell them what I need. Or saying, if you haven't provided any in the past, saying some accommodations that we are already prepared to make include but are not limited to ... And just going the extra mile and listing, like saying, we're not just putting this on paper to look good, we mean what we're saying, and we know what to expect, makes such a big difference in people being able to be open about their disabilities and their accommodations. The one last thing I'll say with NDT, because there's a big movement in the disability community, say the word, getting people comfortable saying the word disability. But for a lot of people with disabilities, there is so much internalized ableism that they don't want to use the word disabled or disability to describe themselves. So on all of our paperwork, we had the box, how would you like to identify disabled, non-disabled, or it's complicated. And we found that a lot of people with disabilities, even people with very visible or apparent disabilities, check the it's complicated box. And so I think just providing those options is a great way to start that conversation. I'm sorry, I talked a little too long.
No, I appreciate that. And Annie, it looked like you had your hand raised. You wanted to respond to a point. So I wanted to go to you really quickly.
Yeah, I think because this is part of the work that I do with sound theater. I think in regards to how do you ask people things that you might not want to ask, I think the biggest thing for me that I truly believe is just like, let disabled people have autonomy and they will do what's best for them. So if you put in a character listing, looking for autistic actor, then like you just assume everybody who auditions for that role is autistic. And you can even say in the audition room, thanks for auditioning. We're really looking for an autistic actor, in case they didn't, catch that point. But then just assume that everybody who comes through the door is what you're asking for. I know if some people were to say, like, we're looking for people who use mobility aids, I don't use mobility aids every day, but I do sometimes use a cane. And so, like, if someone had worked with me in the past, they might not think that I would actually be coming in for the audition, but I would be. So I super believe in just, like, give the information and then just believe disabled people whenever they say what they need or where they need to go, especially because a lot of our, like, wider American culture has a very weird obsession with, like, sniffing out the fakers and, like really scrutinizing to see if people, half the disabled characters you see on TV were like someone faking it to get away with something.
Right.
And I can speak as somebody whose most of their disabilities are invisible. It's exhausting because you're like, do I underpresent this? Do I overpresent it so they know I'm not lying? So I think the biggest thing is just put it out there. The people who need to come will come. If you're not getting people, you can go, further reach out, let people know what you're looking for. And I also super agree with what Mickey had said about, like, saying what accommodations you're already providing. I think that's really good. And that's something we try to do a lot, which is saying, like, for our rehearsal process, these are already the things that we're doing. If you need anything else, please let me know, because I, would very much like to make it happen. And I think kind of reaching out in that aspect too of, like, I would like to make this as easy of a space for you. Here's my proof that I'm not lying, because lots of people say we want disabled actors and then don't want to accommodate us. And then, like, really give specific examples. And if the person doesn't come to you, you're just going to believe them and assume they don't need anything. If they come to you later in the process, you're just going to say, okay, and assume, not be like, why didn't you tell me this earlier?
Right. Right. Well, and I think that the thing that I'm gathering from all three of you, what you've said so far this evening, which has been really, really enlightening, is intention is so important in this particular. When dealing with any of this, be very, very intentional up front with your communication about what you're looking for in your auditions, and walk the walk. Right. I mean, don't just talk it, but if you are going to say, you know, we are willing to accommodate, we're going to accommodate whatever needs that you have. And I love the idea that you said, Mickey, in terms of like, here are the things that we've done in the past and it is not limited to. We are willing to, you know, we'll do what it is that you need to be here. There is a trust that has to be developed within those organizations and people coming to audition. I know, just a side little note here, which is not the same at all, but this is my relation to this, is when we were forming Reboot, one of the things that we held is, you know, it was like, we welcome everybody. We welcome everybody to come and audition for us. And it took some time to build that trust for people to say, do you really? Or is it really just going to be the same person that we've seen in every other show, you know, all over town playing the same roles at your organization? And once you build that trust, you know, then people can start to remove that trauma and be able to let that guard down, to be able to step in and say, I know that this organization is going to do the work and that they're going to follow through, and that they really are going to be a safe space for me to be able to take care of me and to do the things that I need and to provide the things that I need in order to do the work that I need to do. I really, Seranine, it looks like you have a thought on that.
Just generally, I haven't really actually got so far as a lot of as Mickey and Annie in terms of doing a lot of like real, like more serious work in theater. To where I was like seeking much real accommodation in the production process. I have such severe rejection sensitive dysphoria as part of my ADHD that just auditioning is the part that I get stopped at, like even before going to audition, because I have to have the mindset and the energy to maintain the mindset of how do I do this? This is why I do it so infrequently. It's really difficult. It's I remind my body the whole time that we are just trying to help. We're already trying to help. We're already helping this production, which means we're not trying to go for the part. We're offering the instrument that we are for consideration, and that if the decision is we don't want to use this one, then we have helped by just leaving it alone and not being in the way at all. But I have to like do all of this really intense like reassuring of my body constantly that this is what we're doing and how we're doing it, that I end up not really auditioning much. And when I do, it goes freakishly well usually. I had an audition I went for. I went in with that mentality, right? I'm not actually trying to get a part. I'm just offering the instrument. And there was a lead role for a trans man, and then all these supporting roles who could be kind of anything. I went in meaning to read for all these supporting roles, thinking, you know, I'd like this one, probably is the most fun or whatever. And they ended up switching things around and casting me as the lead. But I get there only by going in being like ready to get somewhere between nothing and some kind of bit thing, and just kind of let the director, whoever, let the production people, like this may sound a little off, but I don't know how else to say it, kind of like just make use of my body, right? Like direct me, because I'm good at, if you create enough of a world around me, I'm really good at just inhabiting it and disappearing into it. It's difficult for me to get past the hump of just auditioning. And I don't know how I get to a place where I'm like someone that is known enough or has been seen enough in enough things that people might think instead to reach out to me directly and say, hey, can you film yourself reading this with like this kind of vibe or something, right? This like most realistic way I would get involved in more productions now. So yeah.
No, and you said something that was really quite lovely, Seranine, which was, you know, you go in without the mindset of going after the part that it's just an opportunity that you're offering up. And I wish so many other actors would actually have that mindset coming into that, because it really is, auditioning is the worst thing out there for anybody, frankly. But the idea of being able to come in and just say, this is what I offer to the production. This is how I can benefit it. And if you can use me, great. And if not, is a beautiful way to frame that and to think. I am going to move on just a little bit here, because we are coming up on an hour already, and we've had so many wonderful things, and I've gotten maybe like 3 questions into my list, but just because we've had so many great things to be able to talk about. I want to talk a little bit well, give me just a second here. We're actually going to take a question first while I figure out where I am in my script here. There was a great question, which is actually, this will lead us into our next one. How is your disability? This comes from Chantal, and this is, how has your disability inspired your growth? How has your disability inspired your growth? And I will put that to the floor if there's anybody who would like to take that.
I'm gonna dive in. I'm doing it. No, I see. Dang it! You put your hand up. Now it's weird that I don't.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I kind of touched on it already. I'll just come back. I'll just touch on it again and then leave it. It's really that program I was talking about earlier is like, once I understood that I was here in this space, this apartment for disabled veterans, that being here, and coming out of the trauma of everything having to always constantly be some kind of job, right? Being able to remind my body, okay, if you have a job here, it is to figure out how to rest. It is to actually just like be here and care for this body. And so switching to that mode helped me get to a place where I understood that everything, all the instruction I'd gotten all my life around arts and arts production was just backwards. It was made by people who didn't understand, who didn't have, this is going to sound so corny, but this is how my body is saying it, the only way I know to say it, who didn't have the music in them. Harry, they didn't have the music in them. They had to go look up how to make it because they misunderstood, right? They had never been a bird who just sang because they're just there on the branch and singing, right? So I figured out these things about myself. I started to understand things like, this is a body that left to her own in a quiet enough space without anything else kind of influencing her will start just moving to nothing, as far as I can tell, brain space. And then I start to hear some kind of tones along with the movement. And before long, there's kind of a song that came from just being in a room and just being this body, and that's it. So getting in touch with that same rejection sensitivity, like general sensitivity that all my life people tell me, you're so sensitive, stop being so sensitive. Well, I can't, but I can embrace it. And now I have the time and space to do that. So that's what I've been doing. And I cede the floor.
Annie, how about for you?
Yeah, well, for me, it really specified my career path because I'm an accessibility coordinator and my big interest is disabled theater. And so it really pushed me towards something I care about. And I will say, because I've had to, it really has turned me into somebody who doesn't take crap from anybody. A real pissed off cockroach kind of person. Because like I said, I put my health at risk, just saying, okay, I'll take whatever, which is actors are always, it's like, you just shut up, put your head down and do what the director says. And it has really inspired me to be like, actually, you kind of deserve to be treated like a human person. Because I had to. I was like, if I don't, I might die. So
Right.
And I did want to say, before we have time, I don't know if you were going to move to recommendations for theaters for easy access, but I do have a list if we are going to get there.
Yes, I do want to get there. There are a couple things I just want to touch on, just because if all three of you are okay with going over, I know we promised about an hour, but if you're okay with going over, and if our audience was willing to stick around, this is a fascinating conversation. I would love to touch on a couple more things. I know Scott's probably going to send me an email that says, Harry, we talked about keeping this at an hour, but that's fine. He's not.
Tell him it's my birthday. You're giving me the gift of being
exactly.
Heard.
It's
we're in the moment.
Exactly. It's a very special Reboot represents in honor of Seranine's birthday. So there you go. I do want to touch on just a couple of things, and I specifically want to get to recommendations, Annie, a little bit. One of the things that obviously we believe is representation matters. And I want to know, when it comes to performances on stage or behind the scenes, why is it important to all of you to have that representation out there, whether it is for you or for other people? I would just love to, if you could touch on that, maybe give me one or two lines about why that's important, if that's possible. And we'll start with you, Mickey.
I think when I think about the movies like You Before Me, right? Or Wonder, right? We have all these stories. People love stories about disability. It seems like in the United States, they frickin' love stories about disability, but they hate including disabled voices in the creation of those stories. And so what we end up with is a bunch of young disabled people who have been shown that the stories about you, right, are stories like You Before Me, or I saw a very similar play at a big regional theater that will not be named that was very similar, right? Where a disabled character ended their own life so as not to be a burden on other people. And it's like, these are the stories we're seeing, and disabled people are seeing, I'm a burden, or I'm only here to inspire non-disabled people. And disabled voices are not even valuable enough to be included in the stories about disability, let alone even considering being included about stories about life. Disabled people, about other things, disabled people are not even valuable enough to include in the stories about disability, right? I think about this big Sia movie that everyone was talking about, right, recently. So we need to see, before young disabled people need to be able to turn on their TV or go to the theater and see badass disabled folks who are going to say, you are valuable. And if you access the world differently, if you need special accommodations, the world needs you. That's what I think.
Thank you. How about for you, Annie?
Yeah, I think the big thing with representation, and to me it tends to matter actually more behind the scenes than it does on stage. I think a disabled director can, for most disabilities, show somebody how to do it, because most disabilities are in your body somehow. But so to me, it's actually more important, like the writer and director, because like I've been an actor. I mean, if they were to cast me in Steel Magnolias, because I'm diabetic, that doesn't change the fact that the story kind of sucks. But to me, it's really saying like you're worth being listened to. I think the biggest thing I encounter as a disabled person is just like people don't want to listen. Medical professionals, when I was in school, they didn't want to listen. Like people they hate having to listen to disabled people. And I think part of that comes from they never have to. They never have to. None of their stories, none of their favorite characters, none of their bosses, like they never have to. And so I think part of representation is like, especially in theater, you're on stage, you're in the room, and you're looking at somebody and you're like, your story matters. I care enough to empathize with you for the next 2 hours or the next 20 minutes or however long it is. Like your struggles are worth empathizing with.
I do have a follow-up question on that, if I can. And I saw your hand, Mickey, so I will come to you in just a moment. But my follow-up question, and this is an all skate for everybody. But you mentioned, being cast in Steel Magnolias and that the story would still suck, regardless of the fact that you're a type 1 diabetic. My question then is, how important is it to portray roles where the story does suck versus having new voices and having people in theaters and organizations take a chance to tell the stories of the people that the story should be told, right? I mean, and this is really just me kind of monologuing at this point, so feel free to interrupt at any point. But really, there's the commercial side of that too, where theaters go, we're going to do Steel Magnolias because everybody loves Steel Magnolias and Weezer's hilarious, and right, we're going to make a ton of money off of that, versus actually taking a chance to say, we're going to give a disabled person the opportunity to tell their story and to present a new work and to take those commercial chances. So my question really, as I'm working through all of this, is it a yes and situation? Yes, it's important to still be able to play those roles and to tell new stories, or does it tilt one way or the other?
Yeah, I think it's really yes and, because I think part of theater is like its long running history. And a lot of times I think things can also be helped by directing. Like, I've never seen a production of Steel Magnolias that treats Shelby as the main character. It's always like her struggle actually informs her mother's character arc. But I think through some good directing, you could shift that narrative a little bit in focusing on her as the main character instead. The story starts with her wedding and ends with her death. Like, it's about Shelby, and not just the impact that her being disabled has on her family. So I think it's really yes and, in that a diabetic writer is going to do a better job than something like that. And there are ways to refocus and be creative about, like, the Glass Menagerie is one that I think of. where like a lot of people I talk to don't even realize there's a disabled character in that play because theaters don't tend to treat it like that. And I think you can really like shift a lot of perspectives and do an interesting take on a story if you focus it a different way. But also, I believe so much in new work and like, especially for disabled people. I also believe really hard in like pay disabled people. So when you get a chance to do by disabled people, I say enthusiastically do it and put some money in their pockets.
For sure. For sure. Mickey, I wanted to go to you, and then Seranine, I'm going to jump to you to answer the question because I saw Mickey had his hand up. Oh, you're on mute, Mickey.
I think the moment's passed, so it's not
Okay.
a big. I just wanted to add to what Annie said, or Annie said something about listen to disabled people need to be listened to and heard and believed. And it just made me think on the fact that, like, you know, how our culture is so uncomfortable listening to disabled bodies, looking at disabled bodies. It starts like when kids are really young, if they see someone with a with a visible disability or an apparent disability and look at that person, their parent grabs them, pulls them away and says, "Ooh, don't stare." Or if they ask a question innocently, a young person to someone who they see as different, the parent says, "Shh, don't say that. Don't look at them." Right. And we're essentially training these young people to become adults that feel mortified to look at disability, to talk about disability, to think about disability, because we've trained them that way from a young age. And to the point that as adults, right, adults don't even want to say the word, like they are so mortified by the existence of disabled people and so wish disabled people would just disappear or die or just go away, not just, can we pretend you don't exist, to the point that they don't even say the word disability, right? We say like differently abled, we say special needs, right? All these other, or disability, right? All these different euphemisms because we are so uncomfortable just saying disabled and disability, right? And it's like there's this awesome PSA, I guess, from I think like National Down Syndrome Society or something, but it's like right, special would be if I needed to eat dinosaur eggs for breakfast every morning. That would be special. Special would be if I slept standing up in a tree. That would be really special, right? That would be cool and special. But like the accommodations we need, right? We don't have special needs. We have human needs. We need to be allowed to the table. We need to be listened to and heard and paid. We need employment and love and acceptance. And these are not special needs. There's nothing special about this. We just need to be seen, heard, understood, validated.
Seranine, how about for you?
The representation.
The original question was representation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got my notes. Otherwise, I would be gone. It's tricky because, like I said earlier, there's kind of like very limited jobs for people like me, and that comes from these kind of perceptions, and it means that even within these entertainment industries, they'll be like, "Oh, we can cast a trans woman for that. We have a barista role, right, or something, or like we have a trans story about a trans woman and about her transness, and etc." And then you can get maybe cast in that, right? But because we're still just telling stories, kind of like to the cishet white man kind of notional figure. This is the guy we're kind of making these stories for. It's still this really two-dimensional representation. And the best representation that you can hope for within white supremacy is still just restating white supremacy. It's this trickle-down kind of progress narrative that says, if you are this kind of whatever, disabled person, trans person, etc., you get to exist. And here's how. We'll show you how. Trans women, you can serve coffee, right? This kind of stuff with a smile to a white man. So this is what everyone is taught about what kind of roles are available for them. And that's just a function of the system being what it is. But a lot of that comes from the place of, like we were starting to talk about, focusing not so much on casting a role authentic actor for the part, but having the focus be much more on having writers and producers, directors along the way who share an experience of being, like the core experience of being that defines the character, with that character, ideally along with the actor, but like having all these other people involved at that level, right? This is going to be a really different thing, because authenticity is really a texture that is made up of these innumerable small choices that are informed by lived experience. And all the research in the world and the best method acting in the world will never really cover it. The best thing that you would get is this kind of like bad photograph, right? You'll get like something that's pretty two-dimensional. The resolution won't be very good. And the reason that we're doing this, and the reason it still works, the reason why guys like Matt Bomer get cast to play a trans woman in this thing, and Mark Ruffalo goes on to defend what a great performance he did, is because as far as white supremacy is concerned, as far as the kind of representation I've been talking about is concerned, that's fine. Something kind of two-dimensional that fits the idea that white guys have already, cishet white men have already, of this kind of person. That's okay. So it's really so much a bigger deal to have, like we're talking about, these other roles filled by people that share that core experience with the character, whether it's writers, producers, directors, people who can be in those roles. And also that lets people stand up for accommodations and for disabled people, like other disabled people within a production. And it leaves room for a disabled actor to feel comfortable going to somebody with a problem. Right. If I'm like the lone whatever on a production, this is a terrible thing to be. The lone trans woman on the trans production about the trans, it's a miserable spot. There's no one to tell about the problem. And when you run into the first of them, and you can tell that it's like, you're pulling on the thread of the sweater and it's going to just keep going. It's really difficult to tell what to do, especially someone like me. I'm autistic, and all of my trauma is, well, just keep going. Just at this point, just go along, right? Put your head down and get through it, and do your best to just get through it. Having all these other people who share that experience, whatever those experiences are, even like everybody's flavor of autism is a little bit different, right? But having some kind of experience that's shared, that who are in those other positions, having the writer come in and talk about what's authentic, is so much even a bigger deal, I think, than the actor. Like the actor is important, but if they're made to act out, if I'm there to inhabit an idea of me that's written by someone who isn't me, who's never been me or anything like me, I can read the line with the best direction and intention in the world. But if they don't want to hear what I have to say about how someone, the trans woman who's my age doesn't say this, for example, it's going to just play out that way, and it's going to look how it looks.
Yeah. I have so many thoughts, and I'm just trying to also manage our time here, but I thank you all for sharing those beautiful thoughts. I do want to move forward a little bit and talk about accessibility. And Annie, I know that you have a list of things, and talk about accessibility within the theater here. One of our challenges at Reboot is we are a nomad company, and so we don't have our own space. We are often in these, rented venues in order to do our shows and things like that. But we do want to make our productions accessible to all. Obviously, Mickey, you had mentioned universal design, going in and knowing your space ahead of time, and making sure that you can implement it from the beginning, so that way it's very intentional in terms. But
I do want to add quick that NDT's last production was a school tour where we toured to all sorts of schools that we didn't really get to see until we showed up. And
well, let's dive into that a little bit more. Actually, how was that then for NDT? With the intent to make everything accessible, and then all of a sudden being thrown into a gymnasiatorium, and having to perform, while people are having their chicken strips. I mean, how did you manage that?
Yeah, we called them multi-useless rooms. But I'll answer super quick because I want to hear Annie's list, which is going to be so much better than anything I could say. But yeah, half the time we were told the space was accessible. We told them what we needed in advance. We got there, the space was not accessible. We had actors had no way of getting on the stage.
Wow.
So they said, okay, well, can they just can we lift them onto the stage? And we're like, no, we're not doing that. Sorry. We will perform in front of the stage. And they're like, well, all our kids won't fit in the multi-useless room then if you're in front of the stage. And we're like, well, we are not going on the stage. It's not accessible. Not all of our actors can get on the stage. We will perform in front of the stage. We will find a new orientation for this space to make it work. But long story short, this tour got cut short early because of the pandemic. So we didn't get to go to nearly as many schools as we were expecting to. But 3 of the schools that we went to within weeks of us being there, got financial approval from the school district and the board to make permanent physical changes to their school because of us.
That's
so
great.
It's not perfect, right? You have to be compromising and uncompromising both at the same time. But there was power in having disabled folks in the room saying, okay, we cannot get on this stage. We will not get onto this stage. We will do the show anyway. And your entire audience will see that we couldn't get on the stage while we're doing a show about the ADA and accessibility. And that had the power to make these school boards go shit, and almost instantaneously approve structural changes to their schools.
Wow, that's. I mean, it's sad that it had to happen that way, but wow, that's impressive that the funding was able to come in after that and so quickly as they realized their folly. Thank you for sharing that. Annie, I want to jump to you and just talk a little bit about accessibility in the theater. And if you can just talk about maybe some suggestions that you might have in terms of how to make spaces more accessible, how to make theater more accessible and things like that.
Yeah. I tried to kind of get a list of things that are relatively low budget like themselves. Also, when Mickey talked about lifting people, why do abled people always suggest that as if it's not the most dehumanizing thing in the whole world?
Right.
Like, I'll scoop you up like a bag of flour and toss you. That's equal, right? But my kind of quick list of things that I think are pretty easy to start working on now, also because, like, at Sound Theater, right, we kind of acknowledge accessibility is so big, it deserves a whole person in charge of it. And so there's lots of little things to do, but some specific things that I have are image descriptions for any photos online, social media, or in a program. Or like if you have a digital program version of it, having image descriptions, captions on any videos that are online, extensive trigger warnings for every single production that are very easy to find and the person does not have to go digging for it. And I think people can get kind of creative with how they do these. Sometimes it's just like violence. And it's like, no, I need you to write like intimate domestic violence against a disabled partner. Like, we can get specific about this. No cold reads ever. I hate them. They're not worth it. Throw out cold reads. You'll never need them. Send the sides at least a day ahead of time. Any room that you or building that you're having rehearsal or performances in should have a vending machine or a concession stand or like a stash of snacks, again, to give people the option for whatever reason they might need it. Bathrooms should be close by and there should be clear signage on how to get there. People shouldn't get lost going from your rehearsal space to the bathroom. I also think it's great for front of house staff to learn some basic ASL, even just to ask for like name, ticket, times for when the house is going to open and stuff like that. And this isn't quite as low budget, but I think it kind of talks about what Mickey was saying about like early design. Sensory friendly performances are like great. And I hope they kind of catch on more than they already have been, because I think that's a pretty easy thing to implement more so after the fact. If we're thinking like low budget things, it's not too hard to make a sensory friendly performance. I think those are great. And that's my list of suggestions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. I want to jump to you really quick, Seranine, because you had visited the Reboot board about a year and a half ago, and you had some great thoughts about people who may have mobility issues when it comes to getting to and from auditions. And particularly in this time of COVID and all of our technological, knowledge growth that has happened with using platforms like StreamYard and Zoom and things like that. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about how the audition process could be more accessible for people.
I thought I was talking more about accessing shows. I remember talking about having trouble for me, like when someone would say, "Oh, well, we'll give you a ticket, you can come to this show," and I'm like, they're not considering all of the other things that I have to do to get to the show. That I don't have resources for, right? I can't deal with transportation. I can't deal with feeding myself when I'm out because I have to so narrowly budget to be able to eat when I'm at home. But I think those same kind of considerations are really there for the audition process as well. A lot of this is about, I think, not thinking about it in a traditional form of like, this is job interviews and we gotta like invite all these hard chargers to come here and compete. but rather think in terms of like, especially for the more marginalized groups, being like, we're about trying to develop these marginalized artists who've been taught that they're not artists, right? And a lot of economic barriers reaffirm that. So removing them will challenge that teaching. You can have food available, like Annie's saying. I don't know how realistic it is to have some form of like childcare, or even just say like we've got like people there who can like watch your kids for a few minutes. Maybe you can't do that. But transit reimbursement available on site, like these kinds of things will open that path for a lot of people. And also there's the thing we talked about for like someone like me with rejection sensitive dysphoria, or maybe someone can't get there, and we can now have a way to do these kind of video things where it feels less competitive. And the environment feels more like playful, and everybody's kind of like helping. And even if you're not cast in something, like we're grateful for the contrast that helped us, you know, like talking about that kind of stuff helps me with rejection sensitivity type things. But I think that specifically around rejection sensitivity type of stuff that keeps me from auditioning in the first place is that if you can recognize artists who are like that, that you can cultivate a relationship with them where you say, look, I'm just going to email you once in a while and say, I would love to hear you read this in this kind of vibe, or like in these two kinds of modes. If you have time, what do you think? And then it's just that, and it's not about like how that person fits within, like I'm up against 60 people. Like as soon as you tell me that, I'm just like, oh, like I don't even want to compete because I don't want to take anything from anybody. I'm afraid that I'll win. So those kinds of things are the ones that come to mind for me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We do have a couple of quick questions here as we are winding down. And again, thank you for giving your evening this evening.
Let me give you one, if I can pop in, I'm sorry. I have one
Sure.
thing, one note here I totally forgot about, but I skimmed it right as I said I was done. If you start with the thought of specifically who can't come or isn't coming, you can reverse engineer from that point to figure out what their needs are, or might be. You can start to guess at it, right? So that they can come, and then make a point of in your audition announcement, you know, we've got transit reimbursement. We have whatever it is, right? The thing is that you've tried to reverse engineer it, and maybe also go further and invite a conversation. Like if you're not able to come, if you'd like to audition and can't, we would love to know about what is keeping you from auditioning. You know, we can't necessarily do anything about it, but we're trying to open accessibility at every possible point, every possible avenue. So please help us as someone who wants to come in and can't, because we can't necessarily see that path that's blocked, because for us,
Right.
We're already here.
Right.
So,
And again, going back to what we had talked about earlier, being very intentional about the communication and being able to put that out there to say, hey, this is what we can do for you. If this is not what you need and you need something else, let us know so that way we can make that a possibility for you. I want to jump to just a couple of quick questions here as we're wrapping up. I know I jumped all over my script here, but in the term of times, there's so many great things to talk about. One of the questions that we had popped up is, how has your disability informed how you interact with theater and theater spaces? And that comes from Melanie. So I'm wondering if, Annie, if you want to take this one first, and then we can open it up to the floor.
Sure. I think it makes me really intentional about what I want out of being in a theater space. I tend to not go to auditions that I don't think actually want me, or with groups if I'm like, but I've worked with that person before and I don't know. So it does make me intentional with my time. But I also think it's just like, it's really creative. I think there's so many creative things I have to do and think about as a character that like I bring uniquely to a space. And I remember one time in college, I was in a wheelchair for a show. And at the end of the quarter, my professors were like going over what I did that quarter. And one of them had said, like, oh, it was such a shame I didn't really get to see you do much movement work because you were in a wheelchair for the show. And I kind of was like, I had to learn a whole different way to move in this space. What do you, just because I was sitting, like it doesn't count?
Yeah.
And I thought that was baffling because I was like, I am very comfortable and familiar with wheelchairs now. Luckily, even when I have to use them out and about in my regular life, I'm like, that taught me a lot. And it's odd that you wouldn't think that. And I think even like doing shows, the one time I've gotten to do a show with my cane, like the way that my body moves is unique. And so it really does inform lots of cool decisions and character moments. Like if I did a show at one time and it was just me and one other woman, and there was a night where my back was just killing me. And like it led to a couple months where I was like, she was talking to me and I kind of had to sit down, and she paused and then like sat down next to me to get closer. And I was like, ooh, this is such a cool moment right now that's being informed by the way my body works.
That's a great answer. That's great. Mickey?
Yeah, just jumping on what this is basically almost the same as what Annie said, but I just want to reiterate it because I think it's so important that disabled folks are some of the best creative problem solvers in the world, because we have had to be creative problem solvers our entire lives to navigate a world that was created by and for non-disabled people, right? Everything in our society has been designed almost exclusively by and for non-disabled people. So just inherently, disabled people have had to be creative problem solvers every day to function, to get around, to get what they need, to navigate spaces. So yeah, why wouldn't theaters want us? We are just some of the best creative problem solvers in the whole world.
I love that. Seranine, any thoughts on this question?
Honestly, it's a sort of negative, pessimistic version of what Annie said. And instead of, I am very intentional with my time when I go in, but really the real story is that I very infrequently go in, whether as an audience member or to participate in some kind of production capacity, because the amount of energy it takes for me to get ready to go, even if it goes like bizarrely, smashingly well, like getting cast as the lead in that short that I thought I was going to maybe get a bit part 4 or nothing is like what I went in for, right? Like even when that happens, just my internal process of preparing and going in and being ready for all kinds of anything from people who just don't get it on whatever level about any of the number of kinds of identities that I inhabit, is just a constant thing that I'm really used for. That's actually a bigger thing as an audience member too. Like having to be on guard for the misrepresentation is exhausting, and it doesn't make going to watch the show fun. It makes it work. So I mostly, like a lot of my spare time at home, I'm watching shows on my own on Netflix. I'm watching Chinese shows. They don't blindside me with the same stuff in the same way around like gender or any of this other kind of stuff. But yeah, for disability, it's mostly been that I don't participate, because when I do, it has to be from that place of a lot of buildup and a lot of recovery, no matter how it goes. And it's sad for me to think about, because the thing I would love to spend much more time actually just, for me, it's really play. For my body, it's just constantly like kind of form of play. We're all just doing make believe or something, right? It's kind of rigorous in the sense that we repeat the scene. But when I'm playing the way that I play, the thing that makes me so annoying to people when I'm not doing this kind of work, which makes me so great at the work, is that I am just repeating the moment relentlessly, because that's just super fun for me. That's why I love the games that I love too, right? Just repetitive moments. So I'd love to just do that, but I'm so blocked by these kinds of things that I mostly just don't participate.
I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. Mickey,
I want to just echo what Seranine said, that I never admit this anywhere, but if any friends ever ask me if I saw their show or I never see theater. I cannot remember the last time I've seen a play because I chose to go see it. Like, because I didn't have to go see it. I do not know when the last time I went to see a show was, because you have to think about how are you going to get to the, like, for autistic people like to know what to expect ahead of time. It is so, so helpful to know what to expect ahead of time, and not be surprised by things for an autistic person. And I don't know what to expect in the process of getting to the theater or taking the bus to the theater. Once I'm at the theater, I don't know what the lobby's going to be like, and if I can just like sit down and twiddle my thumbs and stay to myself, or if I'm going to have to mingle with people, or am I going to see someone who I know at the theater? And if I do, am I supposed to mingle with them or not? Or like, I know this sounds so stupid to say out loud, but all those things have just made it, I want to just like reiterate to Seranine that you're not alone, and all those things have also made it so that I never go see theater either, because it's just too much, not fun.
Yeah, when I talk about too that kind of thing, there's also the fact of for people to really take the time and think about the aspects of what I'm talking about. You're saying for an autistic person specifically, for example, knowing what's going to happen is important, and having something deviate from that, it can be really upsetting. What if the thing that deviates from that is that they have this grotesque representation that's really wrong of a trans woman of color, or a trans woman, a trans person at all? That affects me, but then it triggers my rejection sensitive dysphoria, and I'm really spinning out about how completely everyone here is not interested in my being there. Like being in the audience when everyone in the theater laughs at a laugh line that is about a trans identity in some way. Mm-hmm. Especially when it's like a queer friendly type of film festival kind of environment I've been in. That's actually paralyzingly terrifying. And when this happened in the film festival that I was attending as an audience member, just like regular, like wasn't invited anything special, just like regular, come in, buy a ticket and go and see it. I was so stuck in my seat that it took me like 5 minutes to finally just get up and storm out of the place. I was so taken aback and just violently disgusted that everybody around me in this place that I'd been taught it wasn't even just that it came unexpectedly. It was that it was the exact opposite of what I've been told to expect in a queer friendly space. There was a joke at the expense of trans existence, and everybody in that space, all of these supposedly gay and queer people around me, loved it. And they loved the joke of their idea of me.
And then you have to, you're stuck in that space with these people as well. And
what social script do you use?
Yeah, and you're going to have to mingle with these people during intermission after that happened. And do you try to pretend that it didn't happen to be supportive of the people you know in the show, or are you like going to be that person who like is just angry? Like because I'm angry, you know what I mean? But it's like,
here's the thing I figured out about that though, is no matter how it ends up going for you in that moment, you're not watching the show anymore.
No.
And so for me, once I figured that out, I was like, why am I even here? Why am I gonna watch whatever it is when part of watching whatever it is includes I've got to have the energy to be ready for the throwaway joke about a trans woman who's actually a man, and didn't you know kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I have to be ready for that. That's just the background. That's just the texture that reminds people we're on Earth because the sky is blue and men wear dresses, etc. This kind of stuff.
Yes.
Annie, we may have lost Annie. There might be a lag there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I find that's one of the reasons I'm really big on like trigger warnings and like really specific trigger warnings also. Because one, I think it makes people actually like think about what they're portraying in the piece and like the fact that it might be upsetting. But there's been the biggest thing for me in theater is usually sitting there and having something triggering happen and then just like sitting and trying to get your bearings, but like we don't have time to process it. And oftentimes, I just have to get up and go cry in the bathroom or whatever. And Seranine's right. It's like you're not watching the show anymore. And a lot of times it can just be the difference between like having space for it. Like if something upsetting happens and like you don't just then move on to the next scene like it's funny, or outlining very clearly what is it I'm about to walk into. And I find people argue this a lot, that like spoilers, but I'm like, it's theater. Like people still do Hamlet and people still go to see it, even though we all know what happens. Like you're fine. Like
I had a thing, but now I'm laughing and it's gone. No, I was gonna say same thing happens if you're coming in to read for something, right? It doesn't matter that you're necessarily not, it's not necessarily that you're in the audience watching the show. It can be the same thing where you come in, you're reading, and you're blindsided by whatever it is, right? Maybe there's a gag in the thing and everyone around you laughs. And now what do you say something or point it out, or you're kind of just stuck, you're there for the rest of the read or whatever, and like you have to perform, you have to do well because that's your job. So it's a lot that this is the kind of stuff that ends up just keeping me out, thinking about how like not just how badly it could go, but also how badly it has gone when it's gone badly, and that's common, it's ordinary.
I want to thank all of you before we wrap up here, just for your openness and your honesty, and for sharing your hearts and who you are with me as well as our audience. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation, and I know that the people who are watching have really, really appreciated everything that you've been saying. I'm reading comments, and people are just saying thank you so much for talking about this and for being here and being aware. Before we wrap up, I would love to just get maybe a couple of quick lines, and I wish that we had another 3 hours, frankly, because I think we could fill it for sure. Your families and friends might not like it, but we could certainly be here for another 3 hours. I would love to just get maybe a couple of lines about what's happening next for you. And Mickey, I'm going to start with you just because I want to close the loop on the NDT thing that we didn't get a chance to address earlier. You did leave as artistic director from NDT and made a choice to step down at that particular point. So I'm wondering if you can just maybe touch on that really quickly as to why and that was important for you, and then talk about what you're going to do next.
Yeah, I mean, the theater community is very white male centric, right? And the disability community as well is very white male centric. And so when you put this together, NDT was very white male centric, as meeting the person who created it, especially. And so even though we worked so hard in our casting, right? And I mean, I shouldn't say casting, I'm sorry, in the contracts that we offered, where 97% of the contracts went to disabled folks, 50% of the contracts went to POCs, 55% of the contracts went to non-male people. At the end of the day, white cisgendered people are still the ones making decisions. So I just thought we don't have the budget to hire additional people at the moment that would have artistic say. So the best way that I can help to flip that script is by stepping down and requesting to be replaced by, demanding to be replaced by a disabled POC. So that is why I left NDT. And what is next for me is I'm writing a book, and it is coming out. I just had a meeting with the publisher and editor and literary agent this morning. And so the book is coming out in March 2022, just before Autism Acceptance Month next year. So I believe the title now is Fearlessly Different. It might, I no longer get say in the title. The publisher gets to choose the final title. But follow me on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And by this summer, you should be able to pre-order the book, and it'll be out March 2022.
That's great. Fearlessly Different is what the current working title is for Mickey's book. And I think Kevin just flashed up how you can follow Mickey. If we can get that back up there real quick, Kevin, that would be awesome. And you can follow Mickey at mickeyrowe.com to find out more information about what Mickey is up to. Seranine, we didn't really get a chance to talk a lot about the your residency, and we didn't get a chance at all to talk about the residency because we had so many wonderful other things to talk about. But I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the residency and what you're doing there.
I have some notes that I can actually just read through parts of them really quickly. The residency is kind of an extension of work that I've already been doing for years. I've been publicly processing my traumas on Seranine.com, which is just a public figure artist Facebook page. It's kind of like an open journal format look at my daily life. And along the way there, I remember the sex abuse and I'm processing that. So people got to watch all of this unfold in real time. And what comes out of all of that is this tripart album trilogy, Automatron, which is really about my connecting the childhood sex abuse with those kind of patterns of abusive relationships that I survived in my life, including this most recent one at that time. And having those three records tell the whole arc of that, and it ends with me kind of walking away from the kind of Western like model of romantic love or kind of patriarchal like possessive love. And so this residency is an opportunity to produce some original musical theater, and it will be a kind of a branch from the end of that third album where my own individual story or like my own individual kind of process is going to keep on in the fourth album. But the musical is an opportunity I'm really excited about to co-author a story with my closest person in my life about this kind of new way of relating that we're actually just practicing, where we're not like each other's, I don't know, you could say like girlfriend or something like that. But instead are just kind of constantly like permitting each other to be our full selves and inviting each other to be very deeply present where we are with whoever we're with. So it's not at all about possessing the partner and having them like fulfill a role for us, but instead being someone who's just their whole self close to us. I'm really excited about co-producing this autobiographical piece, because that means it's sort of immune to questions about like whether something's realistic for a character or whether a scene would have really happened or something like that. And instead we can focus really completely on how to best communicate what has actually happened and really let us sing. And this comes so much from a place of having read recently this article about this really narrow range and shallow depth of tropes in media representation of surviving sex abuse and rape. So I'm super excited to develop this piece that is with two trans survivors of these kinds of traumas healing together, practicing ways of being intimately close that naturally invite dissent instead of just being focused on trying to get consent. Instead, we're like looking for the no. Like we want to hear about it if someone's uncomfortable in any way, and how that kind of informs all of our relations and the way that we relate generally. And I love what a contrast the opportunity this gives me to present a true life contrast, a real life story that is a contrast of the notion of a trans woman who is like a sexual predator, or kind of like a sort of sad joke of a person, some guy who's sitting around with this dream of maybe being a woman someday or something like that, to just show my actual life with the person who's actually sharing it with me. So it's not even like my story and like my telling people like, oh, I did this and I helped this person in this way and I'm fluffing myself up or something. It's both of us telling our own stories and then also our story together. And I'm super excited about the opportunity to build this and having support to get it actually like built, to write it.
That's great. And that's being produced with Village Theater. That is being workshopped through Village Theater's residency program, which you are part of. And you can find more information about Seranine at seranine.com. And that'll give you all the up-to-date information about what Seranine is doing. And Annie, if you could speak a little bit of kind of about what's next for you and for Sound Theater.
Yeah, so Sound Theater's kind of at a weird point right now where our schedule got kind of shifted. But the current project that we are working on is an ASL interpreted production version of Changer the radio play, which we released back in September, which the website's up there. You can find Changer the radio play there. We have the audio file and a transcript and a video with captions. And we are currently working on an ASL interpreted version. And this is a Coast Salish story, and the original play and radio play was done fully with Indigenous actors. And so we're working with pairing with some Indigenous interpreters and ASL performers to hopefully have that out at some point.
That's awesome. And Annie, we have a fan of yours out here who wants to know if there's a place that they can follow you directly. Do you have a website or a Twitter handle or anything that we can put out for folks to be able to follow you and keep up to date with what you're saying?
I have an Instagram where I post drawings. I don't really have anymore much of a disabled-centric following, but if you're ever interested in the things, most of the work I'm doing is through sound. So if you follow Sound Theater on like Facebook and Instagram, you should be up to date with most of what I'm working on. And if you ever want to get in contact with me, you can just email Sound and they'll send you my way on my company email.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annie. Well, we are well over our time here, but I as we come to a close, I really want to thank Mickey and Annie and Seranine for being a part of tonight's program. It was incredibly enlightening and heartwarming and touching in so many different ways. And I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your soul with me and with our audience. And Gosh, I would love to have all of you back at some point in the future because I feel like there's so many other things that we could talk about and we just didn't get to all of those here. As always, I'd like to thank producer Kevin Tanner and fellow Reboot Represents committee members Lonnie Smith, and a special shout out to Emily Kite, who helped to cultivate tonight's programming. Join us next month for Reboot Represents on May 10th as we take a look at Asian American Pacific Islander History Month. And then after that, we will close out our season with our Pride episode, which will be airing June 14th. More information about that can be found on our webpage. You can go to reboottheater.org, or you can find us on Facebook, or you can follow us at our Facebook page or our YouTube page or our Instagram page. Maybe we have a Snapchat. I don't know anymore. I don't handle the social media. That's up to Scott and Jasmine. But make sure to check all those things, follow us, like us, and you can get that information. Finally, I just want to say thank you to all of our audience members for giving up your Monday evening and spending it with us. We can't do this without you, and we definitely appreciate you being here. For Reboot Represents, I am your host, Harry Turpin, and I am reminding you to trust yourself, to be yourself, and we will see you next time. Have a great night.